The separation of heaven and earth. Before there were islands, there was no horizon. There was no edge where sky leaned toward water, no mountain breaking mist, no shoreline holding shape. There was only suspension, a vast, undifferentiated expanse, neither dark nor light, neither silent nor sounding, but something prior to both. In the earliest memory of the world, heaven and earth were not yet distinct. They existed as mixture, heavy and light intertwined, clear and murky without boundary, potential without direction. Nothing had weight enough to fall. Nothing had clarity enough to rise. It is difficult to imagine such a state. We are accustomed to separation. We know the difference between above and below, between breath and stone, between warmth and absence. But there was a moment before difference. The ancient telling does not rush this moment. It lingers. From the subtle movement within the vastness, lighter elements began to ascend. Not violently, not suddenly, gradually, the clear rose, the dense settled. Heaven formed not through conquest, but through refinement. Earth gathered not through collision, but through gravity of its own becoming. This was the first separation. Above, below, and between them, distance. That distance is important. Without distance, there is no relation. Without relation, no story can unfold. In that widening space between heaven and earth, something else emerged. Presence. The earliest deities did not appear as thunder. They did not announce themselves. They condensed, like dew, gathering on unseen surface. One after another, kami arose from the refinement of the cosmos. They were not creators yet. They were recognitions, awareness forming inside structure. Each represented a principle rather than a personality, growth, stability, emergence, hidden potential. They did not act dramatically, they existed, and existence itself was already a profound shift. Heaven became the high plane, not yet inhabited in any familiar sense but steady. Earth remained young, fluid in places, unfinished in contour. Between them lingered the floating bridge of heaven, a threshold rather than a road. The cosmos was no longer undifferentiated, but it was not yet intimate. There was structure, there was orientation, but there was no touch. Time, in this stage, does not move like ours. There were no seasons to mark it, no sun to measure passage, no moon to divide darkness, only becoming. The heavy continued to settle. The light continued to refine. And from the lineage of these early presences, a pair would eventually emerge whose task was not merely to exist, but to shape. But before shaping comes contemplation. The high plane of heaven was not restless. It did not tremble with urgency. It held stillness. If we imagine the world at that moment, we should not imagine noise. We should imagine suspension, a held breath, something waiting without impatience. Heaven above had clarity but no landscape. Earth below had substance but no definition. The distance between them was possibility, and possibility left unattended remains potential only. The earliest kami understood this. Creation does not erupt fully formed. It begins with orientation, with recognition that something can be made. From the high plane, gaze turned downward. From the unsettled earth, presence weighted upward. The separation was complete. But relationship had not yet begun. This is the quiet architecture on which all later events depend. Before grief, before light, before storm, there was refinement. Above and below, clear and dense, distance and anticipation. The world had structure now, but it did not yet have islands, Izanagi and Izanami. From the stillness of the high plane, after the first separation had settled, two presences emerged with a different quality. They were not abstract principles. They were relational, Izanagi and Izanami. Male and female, not as opposition but as complement. They were not born into a finished world. They were born into responsibility. The earlier kami had refined heaven and earth. But refinement alone does not create landscape. It clarifies possibility. The task of shaping was given to them. They stood upon the floating bridge of heaven, a threshold suspended between above and below. Beneath them lay the unsettled earth, not solid, not stable, more like a drifting mass, a body not yet aware of its own boundaries. The high plane did not command them with thunder. It entrusted them quietly. In their hands was placed a spear. It was not ornate. It was not blazing with divine fire. It was a tool, the jeweled spear of heaven. Izanagi held it. Izanami stood beside him. Together they leaned over the edge of the bridge and lowered the spear into the fluid earth below. They stirred, not violently, gently, circular motion through the drifting mass. Creation, in this telling, fell. Those drops hardened. Solidified fell. Those drops hardened, solidified, coalesced into the first island. Onagoro, it rose not from conquest but from contact. Land formed because heaven reached downward and earth responded. Izanagi and Izanami descended from the bridge to this new solidity. They stood upon ground that had not existed moments before. There is something intimate about being the first to stand somewhere. The island was small, raw, unfinished, but it was stable, and stability invites structure. They erected a pillar, a central axis, heaven above, earth below, pillar between. The world was no longer only separation, it had connection. They walked around the pillar in opposite directions. When they met, Izanami spoke first. Her greeting was gentle, but the order, it was later said, had been reversed. The ritual was imperfect, and from that first union came something malformed, a being not fully viable. The lesson was quiet but firm. Order matters. Alignment precedes growth. They tried again. This time, Izanagi spoke first. The greeting matched the pattern, and from that union the islands of Japan began to emerge, one after another. Not instantly, not all at once, gradually. Each island formed as extension of harmony, Awaji, Shikoku, Kyushu, Honshu. They were not named in haste, they were recognized. The land unfolded through relationship. The world, once fluid and indistinct, now had contour. Mountains would rise later. Rivers would carve their paths later. But foundation had begun. Izanagi and Izanami did not stop with land. They continued. From their union came deities of wind, of trees, of fields, of mist. Each force of nature given shape. Given presence, the world grew textured. Sound began to matter. Movement began to matter. There was sky, there was sea, there was soil. The distance between heaven and earth was no longer emptiness. It was inhabited. But creation is not without cost. Each birth demanded energy. Each emergence required something given. And as the land expanded, as life accumulated, as patterns stabilized, the intensity of creation deepened. They did not yet know that refinement would soon meet consequence. They did not yet know that fire would enter the world. For now, there was partnership. There was rhythm. Heaven had reached downward. Earth had solidified. Islands stood where there had been drift, and at the center of it all, two figures moving in alignment. Creation had begun. But it was not yet complete. Fire and the first lost creation continued. Islands had risen. Forests had begun to breathe. Wind moved with intention. Mist lifted from newly formed valleys. Izanagi and Izanami did not pause. From their union came deities of rivers, of mountains, of fertile plains, of harvest yet to come. Each birth extended the structure of the world. Each emergence made the earth more defined. There is a quiet momentum in creation. Once it begins, it tends to unfold. But not all forces arrive gently. Among the later births came one whose nature was different, Kagutsuchi, the spirit of fire. He did not descend softly into the world. He burned into it. Flame had not yet existed. Warmth had been present but contained. Fire introduced transformation. Fire consumes to reveal. Fire clears to reshape, but fire also wounds. As Kagutsuchi emerged, his heat was unbearable. The intensity of his birth seared Izanami. It was not symbolic pain, it was rupture. The one who had shaped islands, who had stabilized drifting earth, who had given contour to the world, was undone by the force she had helped bring forth. Creation met consequence. Izanami weakened. Her strength diminished not gradually, but with the sudden awareness that something irreversible had occurred. The land continued to exist. The islands did not sink. The mountains did not collapse. But something within the center of creation shifted. Izanagi watched. He had stood beside her through the shaping of the world. Now he stood beside her as vitality left. There are moments in myth that do not require spectacle. This was one. No thunder, no collapsing sky, only the quiet recognition that even divine hands cannot shape without cost. Izanami spoke little. There are times when words do not ease transition. She descended into the realm not yet fully understood. Yomi, the land of shadow, not yet defined as a punishment, not yet framed as fear, simply a place where what has ended goes. The world above remained, but it no longer felt untouched. Izanagi did not respond with calm. Grief unsettles. He turned toward Kagutsuchi. The fire that had burned through his companion now stood before him. Flame flickered without remorse. Fire does not apologize for its nature. In anger and in sorrow, Izanagi drew his blade. He struck. The cutting of fire did not extinguish flame. It divided it. From Kagutsuchi's severed form emerged other presences, spirits of volcanic mountains, of molten rock beneath Earth's crust, of heat that sleeps until awakened. Even destruction generated continuity, but continuity did not erase absence. Izanagi had acted, yet Izanami was still gone. This was the first grief of the world. Before this moment, creation had unfolded without loss. Now the pattern had altered. Life and death stood within the same structure. Fire had revealed something the early islands had not. Creation is not sterile. It demands. It changes what it touches. Izanagi did not remain still. He did not accept separation easily. The thought formed within him with increasing weight. He would descend. He would follow her into Yomi, not to conquer, and not to reshape, but to retrieve. Love, when faced with loss, often moves toward what has vanished. The floating bridge still stood above. Heaven remained refined. Earth remained solid. But the world no longer felt complete. The distance between heaven and earth had once been possibility. Now it held absence. The pillar they had raised still marked connection, but connection had been tested. Before islands, there had been suspension. Now there was memory. Fire continued to exist. Volcanoes would one day rise. Forges would one day glow. Warmth would sustain life. But it had entered the world through rupture. The first loss had occurred, and with it, a new phase of the story began. Creation had shaped the land. Now consequence would shape the gods. Izanagi prepared to descend into shadow. The decision to descend. The fire did not vanish. Its presence remained within the land, contained now in mountain and molten stone. But what lingered more heavily was absence. Izanagi stood where they had once stood together. The islands did not crumble. The wind did not cease. Creation continued its quiet rhythm, and yet something fundamental had shifted. Before fire, the world had expanded without cost. After fire, it expanded with memory. Izanami had descended into Yomi. The realm was not fully described, not mapped, not measured. It was simply where what had ended went, a shadowed continuation, neither heaven nor earth, neither above nor below, a region outside the architecture they had built. Izanagi remained in the world of light, but light felt altered. When one presence is removed, space changes. He moved through newly formed forests and along the edges of raw coastline. The land held shape. The rivers found their direction. Yet every contour reminded him of the one who had shaped it beside him. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it is repetition. Memory replaying gestures that no longer occur. The pillars still stood at the center. Heaven above, earth below, connection intact. But the one who had walked around it with him was gone. There are moments in myth when action pauses. This was one of them. He did not rush immediately into descent. He lingered, as if waiting for the world itself to object. But the world did not object. It continued. Wind through leaves, water against shore. Distant rumble beneath mountain. The continuity of the world did not cancel his rupture. And so a thought began to form. Not born of strategy, not born of divine decree, born of attachment. He would follow. He would cross the boundary that had not yet been fully defined. The floating bridge still hovered between realms. It had once been threshold of creation. Now it would become threshold of retrieval. To descend is not simple. It is not merely movement downward. It is willingness to enter what is unlit. Izanagi had shaped land, he had cut flame, but he had not yet faced shadow directly. Yomi was not described as torment. It was described as continuation in another form, a realm where the spark of life no longer animated the body, a region without sun, without reflection. He did not consult the earlier kami. He did not seek permission from the high plane. Grief rarely waits for approval. He prepared alone. The journey was not triumphant. It was deliberate. He crossed the bridge. He moved beyond the familiar architecture of sky. The light thinned gradually, not extinguished, but diluted. The air grew heavy. Sound carried differently. Even the ground felt altered beneath his step. The boundary between realms is not marked with gates. It is marked with sensation. And as he moved further from heaven and further from earth, the separation established at the beginning took on new meaning. Above and below were no longer only structural differences, they were existential ones, life and death, presence and absence. The descent was not immediate darkness, it was dimming, a slow erosion of clarity. Shapes softened, edges lost precision. Time itself felt less sequential. He called her name, not loudly, but with certainty. Sound did not echo as it had in open land. It seemed absorbed, as if the realm did not reject him, but did not amplify him either. This was not a place built for return. Yet he continued. Because love often moves where structure advises caution. The architecture of creation had been built on separation and connection. Now, separation felt absolute, and he was unwilling to accept it. The first grief of the world was becoming the first defiance, not against heaven, not against earth, but against finality. The further he moved, the less defined the world became. The light of the high plane no longer reached him. The solidity of the islands felt distant. Yomi did not announce itself, it absorbed, and still he walked. The forbidden glance. The air in Yomi did not move. It did not carry wind, it did not carry warmth. It simply existed. Izanagi continued forward until the dimness deepened into something heavier. There are places where light fades gradually, and there are places where it seems to hesitate at the edge. Yomi was the latter. He called her name again. This time there was response. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Izanami. Her voice did not echo as it once had in open sky. It felt contained within the space around her. She answered him from beyond a threshold, not fully visible, not fully hidden. She spoke without accusation, without anger. Her words were calm but altered. You should not have come. The sentence was not rejection, it was warning. Yomi was not built for return. It was not a place designed for reversal. Izanagi did not retreat. He spoke of the islands, of the forests rising. And silence followed. Not refusal. Silence followed. Not refusal. Consideration. Then she answered again. I have already eaten of this place. The phrase carried weight. In myth, to eat is to bind. To partake is to belong. Yomi was not simply a location, it was condition. Still, she did not dismiss him. She told him to wait. She would ask permission of the powers within. She would attempt to return, but he must not look upon her. The boundary was clear. He must not look. Not because sight itself was forbidden, but because some transformations cannot be undone once witnessed. Izanagi agreed. He stepped back into shadow. He waited. Time did not move in Yomi as it had under open sky. Moments stretched. Or perhaps they folded inward. There was no sun to measure delay, no sound to measure passing. Only dimness and anticipation. Waiting tests resolve. The mind begins to question. What is being negotiated? What is being concealed? How altered is she? Silence deepened. The longer he stood in stillness, the more doubt entered. Grief can be patient, but uncertainty unsettles it. He reached into his hair, removed a tooth from the comb that bound it, struck it against stone. A spark, small, brief, but enough to create light. It flickered against the dimness, and in that flicker he saw Izanami, but not as she had been. Her form had changed. Decay had already begun its quiet work, not grotesque in spectacle, but undeniable. The stillness of Yomi had entered her. Transformation had progressed beyond reversal. In that single glance, several things became clear. She could not return unchanged. He could not unknow what he had seen. The spark faded. Darkness resumed its hold. But knowledge remained. In myth, the forbidden glance is not about curiosity alone. It is about boundary. He had been told not to look. He had agreed. Yet doubt overcame restraint. And in seeing what lay beyond life, he shattered the fragile possibility that patience might have preserved. The silence broke. This time her voice carried emotion. Not anger at his arrival, but at his sight. You have seen me. The tone shifted. What had been warning became distance. Yomi was no longer tentative. It solidified around her, and around him. The boundary had been crossed. Some knowledge cannot be reversed. Some thresholds, once seen clearly, no longer felt neutral. It had weight now. The stone and the vow darkness no longer felt neutral. It had weight now. The silence of Yomi, once patient, shifted into something watchful. Izanagi stepped backward. Not in panic, but in recognition. He had crossed a boundary. He had looked. And in that looking, the fragile bridge between life and death had fractured. Izanami's voice changed. It no longer carried softness. It carried distance. You have shamed me. The words did not thunder. They settled. What had been negotiation became finality. She called upon the forces of Yomi. From the shadowed edges of that realm, presences stirred. Not monsters in spectacle, but embodiments of decay. Attendants of stillness. keepers of what no longer breathes. They began to move toward him. Izanagi turned. The descent that had been deliberate became retreat. He moved quickly through the dim passage, the ground uneven beneath him. Yomi did not rage, it absorbed, but now it resisted. The air felt heavier, the distance longer. As he fled, the boundaries of that realm seemed to stretch. The path back did not appear as clearly as the path inward. Behind him, pursuit. Not frantic, but inevitable. He reached into his garments, threw down what he carried. From the comb in his hair fell grapes. They scattered. Those who followed paused to consume them. Hunger interrupts pursuit. He gained distance. Further along, he broke off part of his headdress, threw it behind him. Bamboo shoots sprang from it. Again, delay. Again, movement regained. Myth does not portray this as chaos, it portrays it as resistance through transformation. Even in retreat, creation continues, but Yomi was not finished. The great hags of that realm advanced, not swift, but persistent, and behind them, Izanami herself. No longer pleading, no longer negotiating, but bound to the realm she had entered. The exit approached. A faint shift in texture, the boundary between shadow and earth thinned. He reached it, stepped through, and as he did, he seized a massive boulder, dragged it to the mouth of the passage, placed it firmly between worlds. The stone was not ornate. It did not glow, it did not shimmer with divine script. It was heavy, and it sealed. On one side, light, breath, continuity. On the other, stillness, decay, irreversibility. The first permanent boundary had been set. Izanagi stood on the side of the living. Izanami remained within Yomi. The stone did not silence her. Her voice carried through the barrier. If you leave me here, I will claim 1,000 lives each day. It was not threat in anger, it was declaration of structure. Death would now move through the world with rhythm. Izanagi answered from the side of light. Then I will cause 1,500 to be born. Not denial, balance. The vow did not erase grief, it formalized it. From that moment forward, life and death would move together. Not in equal measure, but in proportion. The world that had once expanded without cost now contained cycle, birth, decline, return. The stone remained, not merely as obstacle, as reminder. Some thresholds once crossed cannot be reopened. Izanagi did not attempt another descent. He turned from the sealed passage. He carried with him not only memory of loss, but knowledge of mortality. Before this moment, death had entered through fire. Now it had been given pattern. 1,000, 1,500. Loss and renewal intertwined. The separation of heaven and earth had created structure. The sealing of Yomi created rhythm. He walked away from the boundary. The world above still moved. Wind through trees, water shaping shore. But nothing was untouched now. Creation had been altered by consequence. The pillars still stood. Heaven above, earth below, and between them, not only distance but cycle. Purification and emergence. The stone remained where it had been placed. It did not tremble. It did not crack. It simply held. On one side, Yomi continued in its stillness. On the other, the world of breath resumed its motion. Izanagi walked away from the boundary, but the boundary did not have sealed death into structure. Now he had sealed death into structure. Now he carried residue, not visible in flame, not visible in wound, but present. The air of Yomi had clung to him. Its heaviness lingered on skin and thought. The vow had formalized mortality, but it had not restored balance within him. He turned toward water, not toward the sea of restless tide, not toward storm, but toward a river, flowing, continuous, unconcerned with boundary. Water had shaped the islands before he noticed it. It had moved around stone without argument. If fire reveals through rupture, water restores through patience. He stepped into the current. It was not ceremony at first, it was instinct. He removed garments that had brushed against shadow, laid them aside. He entered deeper. The river did not recoil from him. It did not resist. It accepted. He washed his hands. The motion was deliberate, not hurried. He washed his face. The water cooled what memory had heated. He rinsed his arms, his chest, his hair. Each movement lessened the weight. Purification in this telling is not denial of what occurred. It is acknowledgement. He had touched death. He would not carry it unexamined into the world of light. As he cleansed, something shifted. Not in the river alone. Within him. From the droplets that fell from his body, new presences began to gather. When he washed his left eye, clarity condensed. From that clarity emerged Amaterasu. She did not blaze into being, she unfolded. Radiance without violence. Her light did not scorch, it defined. Where she stood, distance gained meaning. Edges sharpened, contours clarified. The world, dimmed by grief and shadow, received illumination. Not to erase death, but to orient life around it. Izanagi washed his right eye. From that movement came Tsukuyomi, cooler, measured. If Amaterasu revealed the day, Tsukuyomi would govern its counterpart. Night would not oppose light, it would balance it. Reflection requires shadow. Then he washed his nose. From breath emerged motion. Susanoo. Not gentle like river, not steady like sun. Restless. As wind that does not yet know direction. Three forces now stood where there had once been one. Day, night, storm. They were not corrections of death, they were expansions of structure. The vow at the stone had formalized mortality. This purification formalized rhythm. Amaterasu was given the high plane of heaven. Her radiance steadied what had felt unsettled. Tsukuyomi was given the realm of night. He would govern quiet reflection. Susanoo was given the sea, wide, unfixed, ever-moving. Division here was not exile, it was alignment. Each force requires domain, but something subtle lingered beneath the assignments. Susanoo wept, not from weakness, not from confusion, from grief. He had been born of purification, yet he carried the echo of Yomi. His tears did not fall softly, they churned. The sea responded. Waves rose. Wind sharpened. Grief, when not integrated, moves outward. Amaterasu ascended into heaven. Her light stretched across the high plain. Tsukuyomi withdrew into measured shadow. Susanoo remained unsettled. The architecture of the world had grown more complex. Heaven above, earth below. Death sealed, birth formalized. Day and night defined, storm introduced. The first separation had created structure. The sealing of Yomi had created cycle. Now, purification created contrast. Light against shadow. Calm against turbulence. Balance had not been perfected. It had been made dynamic. The river continued to flow. Izanagi stepped from its current. He did not feel untouched. He felt reoriented. Death would move through the world. But so would light. Grief would surface, but so would clarity. The world had entered a new phase. Not innocent, but illuminated. Susanoo's grief light had returned to the high plane. Night had found its rhythm. The architecture of the world felt steadier than before. But stability at the surface does not always mean stillness beneath. Susanoo stood at the edge of his assigned domain. The sea stretched outward, vast, shifting, without fixed boundary. It was an appropriate realm for him, restless, uncontained, always in motion. Yet he did not move into it with confidence. He wept. His tears fell not quietly like rain, but heavily, disturbing what they touched. The sea answered him. Waves rose higher than before. Wind sharpened along the surface. Grief does not vanish because structure improves. He had been born from purification, but purification does not erase origin. He carried the echo of Yomi. He carried the memory of descent without having descended himself. He longed for his mother, not as creator, not as figure of myth, but as presence. There is something difficult in being born after rupture. The world he entered already contained loss. Amaterasu moved through the high plane with steady radiance. Tsukuyomi maintained his measured orbit. Susanoo, in contrast, felt misaligned. He did not question his domain aloud, but he resisted it in motion. Instead of calming the sea, he churned it. Instead of guiding its rhythm, he disrupted it. Tides swelled unpredictably. Clouds gathered without pattern. When grief cannot find direction, it becomes turbulence, Izanagi observed. He had sealed Yomi. He had declared balance. Now he saw imbalance forming again. Not from death, but from unrest. He commanded Susanoo to govern the sea properly, to steady its currents, to bring order to its vastness. But instruction alone does not integrate sorrow. Susanoo's tears did not cease. They widened. He spoke finally. He did not deny his grief. He named it. He wanted to see Izanami. He wanted to descend. The wish echoed his father's earlier movement. But descent had already proven costly. Yomi was sealed. The stone remained. The vow had been spoken. There would be no second crossing. Izanagi's patience thinned. He had already walked into shadow once. He would not allow its pull to extend again. Susanoo was banished, not destroyed, not erased, sent away from the high plane. Exile is another form of boundary. Before departing fully, Susanoo turned toward his sister. Amaterasu. Light and storm rarely meet without tension. She received him with caution. Radiance does not reject turbulence outright, but it recognizes risk. Susanoo proposed a ritual oath. If his heart held malice, let creation expose it. They exchanged objects. She took his sword, he took her jewels. Breath passed over metal, breath passed over stone. From these exchanges, new presences emerged, proof for a moment that destruction was not his only capacity. Balance appeared possible. But unrest does not dissolve instantly, it recedes, then resurfaces. After the ritual, Susanoo's movements grew erratic. He uprooted sacred trees, he destroyed irrigation channels that had only just begun to shape the land. He scattered the boundaries that had been so carefully established. The sea roared beyond its shoreline. Fields were trampled. Storm without direction seeks outlet. Amaterasu watched. She did not answer destruction with force. She continued to shine, but light can be strained. There are spaces in heaven meant for cultivation, weaving halls where pattern forms slowly. Susanoo entered those spaces, not to observe, but to disrupt. The tension between them tightened. Grief unintegrated often turns outward. And when it does, it challenges even light. The high plane had stabilized after Yomi. Now it trembled again. Not because death returned, but because sorrow had not been fully understood. Susanoo's grief had transformed into motion, motion without alignment. The sea foamed at its edges. Clouds thickened over heaven. And something approached that would test whether light could endure disruption without becoming harsh itself. The cave of Amaterasu tension in the high plane did not explode at once. It accumulated, like clouds gathering without thunder. Susanoo's movements grew more reckless. He trampled the carefully tended rice fields. He broke down the ridges that directed water. He uprooted trees planted with intention. Each act was not random, it was displacement. Grief unspoken had turned into action unchecked. Amaterasu endured. Light does not retreat at the first sign of storm. She continued to move across heaven, steady, composed. But even radiance can be strained. The weaving hall was a sacred place. Threads drawn slowly, patterns forming over time, creation through patience. It was there that Susanoo committed his most disruptive act. He hurled the flayed body of a celestial horse into the hall. The gesture was not loud, it was invasive. The loom trembled, threads snapped. One of Amaterasu's attendants collapsed. Silence followed. Not the silence of peace, the silence of violation. Amaterasu did not cry out. She did not retaliate. Instead, she withdrew. Light often retreats not from weakness, but from exhaustion. She turned from the hall and moved toward a cave, its entrance dark and unassuming. She entered and sealed it behind her. Stone met stone, heaven dimmed. On earth, shadows lengthened. Cold extended across fields that had only just stabilized. It was not immediate chaos, it was absence. Without her presence, direction blurred. Edges softened. Time felt heavier. The kami gathered outside the cave. They did not attempt to break the stone. Force had caused this withdrawal. Force would not restore it. They conferred. They reflected. And they chose an unexpected response. They polished a mirror until it reflected without distortion. They strung sacred jewels upon a tree before the cave's entrance. They prepared offerings. And then Uzume stepped forward. Her dance was unrestrained, improper, deliberately exaggerated. She laughed, not politely, not cautiously, but with abandon. The gathered kami laughed with her. It was not mockery, it was disruption of despair. Laughter in darkness has weight. Inside the cave, Amaterasu heard it. Joy where there should have been none. Curiosity stirred. She asked from within why celebration occurred when the world lay in shadow. And they answered, because a greater light has appeared. Suspicion mixed with curiosity. She moved closer to the entrance. A narrow crack opened. The mirror stood before her. And when she looked, she saw herself. Not diminished, not replaced, simply present. Recognition moved through her. The world outside did not demand her return. It reflected her value. Light did not burst outward. It reemerged gradually. Stone shifted. Warmth returned. Shadows receded. The high plain brightened. Earth regained contour. The cave remained, but it no longer concealed. Susanoo's exile became final. His grief had tested heaven. His disruption had revealed something essential. Light can withdraw, but it can also be invited back without violence. Balance is not restored by force alone. It is restored by reflection. And the mirror remained. Not as weapon, as reminder. The jewels remained. Not as ornament, as connection. The world resumed its rhythm. Day followed night. Wind crossed sea. Fields grew again. But something subtle had changed. Heaven had learned vulnerability. Light had learned its own absence. Storm had learned consequence. The architecture of separation, once simple, above and below, had grown more intricate. Now there was interior, there was withdrawal, there was return. The cave did not disappear from the world. It existed thereafter as possibility. Whenever exhaustion overtakes radiance, there is always a place of retreat. And whenever retreat deepens too far, there remains the possibility of reflection. The high plane stabilized once more, but stability now carried memory. The world was no longer innocent of shadow. It was conscious of it, and in that consciousness it had grown. Light had returned to the high plane. The cave stood open once more. The mirror remained polished. The fields resumed their quiet growth. But harmony restored does not erase consequence. Susanoo could not remain. His grief had shaken heaven. His actions had strained even light. Exile was not sudden violence, it was inevitability. He stood at the edge of the high plain, where sky thins toward earth. Below lay the world newly formed. Mountains still raw in contour, rivers carving uncertain paths, forests thick and unmeasured. The sea waited as well, restless, wide, unfinished. He had once been assigned dominion over it, but dominion requires integration. Integration had not yet come. He descended, not in triumph, not in defiance, in separation. The movement from heaven to earth was not like the falling. It was thinning. Radiance lessened, distance shortened, weight increased. When he reached the earth below, the air felt heavier than in the high plain. Sound carried differently. Wind touched skin instead of simply moving through space. Earth is denser than heaven. It requires grounding. He wandered, at first without direction. Storm does not immediately become guidance. It disperses. He crossed ridges newly risen, moved along riverbanks not yet named, watched mist gather over valleys at dawn. The world below did not reject him. It did not recognize him either. Exile often begins in anonymity. He was no longer brother to light, no longer presence among celestial assembly. He was simply movement across unfinished land. There is something humbling in walking where no one expects you. The forests did not part. The mountains did not bow. They existed. And in their existence they offered resistance not through force, but through indifference. Storm without audience must confront itself. He came upon a river one evening, its surface reflecting faint sky. Beside it sat an elderly couple and a young girl. Their posture was heavy, not with age, with dread. Susanoo approached quietly. He asked the cause of their sorrow. The old man answered. Each year a serpent descended. 8 heads, 8 tails, eyes red as winter berries, its body vast enough to coil across valleys. Each year it devoured one daughter. 7 had already been taken. The girl beside them was the last. This was not grief of heaven, this was grief of earth. Repetition of loss without vow of renewal. The serpent was not chaos in abstract, it was terror localized, persistent, predictable, unstopped. Susanoo listened. He did not speak immediately. Grief recognizes grief. He had unsettled heaven. Now he encountered devastation below. There are moments in myth when exile becomes opportunity, not for redemption declared, for direction discovered. He asked the girl's name, Kushinada Hime. Her presence was quiet, not radiant like Amaterasu, not restless like sea, but grounded, rooted in land. He considered, storm can destroy, but storm can also clear. He proposed a plan, not immediate confrontation, preparation. He instructed the couple to brew strong sake, to build a fence with 8 gates. At each gate, place a vat of liquor. The plan was not brute force. It was strategy. The serpent would come. It always did. Predictability is weakness when understood. As they prepared, Susanoo stood at the edge of River Light. Exile had not diminished his power. It had redirected it. The storm that once disrupted heaven now faced a terror embedded in earth. Above, the high plain remained bright. Below, valleys waited in fear. Between them stood one who had known grief, who had caused imbalance, who now encountered suffering not of his own making. Exile had brought him here. And here, something would shift. The fence was built before nightfall. 8 gates, 8 vats placed carefully, each filled with sack brewed thick and strong. The old couple worked with trembling hands, not from doubt in Susanoo, but from the familiarity of loss. They had prepared for this night before. There were 7 times, each time ending the same. The valley held its breath. Mist gathered low along the river. Kushinada Hime stood quietly beside her parents. Her fear did not erupt into panic. It settled into stillness. Susanoo observed the landscape. He did not pace. He did not shout challenge into darkness. Storm, when directed, becomes focus. The ground beneath the valley showed scars, flattened grass, displaced stones, deep impressions carved into earth. The serpent had come many times. Predictability, he had said, is weakness. Night deepened. The sound arrived before the sight, a slow, grinding movement. Not a roar, more like the dragging of weight across soil. Then it emerged. Orochi. Its body stretched across the valley like a shifting ridge. 8 heads rising, swaying independently. 8 tails coiling through grass and stone. Its scales were dark and mottled, as though earth itself had hardened into flesh. From each head came breath heavy with age. The serpent was not young fury. It was ancient persistence. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlit dimness. It did not rush. It knew its dominance. For years, nothing had resisted. It approached the fence. Each head turned toward one of the vats. The scent of sake rose into the night air, fermented, thick, intoxicating. One head lowered, then another, then another. 8 mouths drank, not cautiously, deeply. The valley remained silent. Susanoo did not interrupt. Confrontation does not always begin with blade. It begins with timing. The serpent drank until its movement slowed. Its heads swayed less deliberately. Breath thickened. Weight shifted unevenly. One by one, the massive forms lowered to the ground. The coils slackened. The valley did not erupt in relief. It remained watchful. Susanoo stepped forward. He drew his sword. The blade did not blaze with celestial fire. It was steel, purpose sharpened. He moved methodically, from head to head, cutting, not wildly, not in frenzy, each stroke deliberate. The serpent's blood seeped into earth, dark against the soil. The body convulsed, but slowly. Not with sudden violence, with the fading of what had long been entrenched. When he reached one of the tails, his blade struck something resistant, metal against something harder than scale. He cut deeper. Within the tail he discovered a sword, not crafted by mortal hand, not forged in heaven, hidden, concealed within chaos. He drew it free. The blade gleamed faintly in the night. Later, it would be known as Kusanagi, but in that moment it was simply revelation. Chaos had contained a gift. The serpent lay still. The valley exhaled. The old couple stepped forward carefully. Kushinada Hime moved closer to her parents. The cycle had ended, not through plea, not through sacrifice, through intervention aligned with strategy. Storm had found direction. Susanoo did not celebrate loudly. He did not claim dominion over the valley. He had encountered grief. He had recognized repetition, and he had ended it. Exile had brought him to purpose. The serpent had not been random terror. It had been entrenched imbalance. 8 heads, 8 cycles of loss, predictable suffering, cut through by patience and timing. He looked at the sword in his hand. It had emerged from within destruction. Power discovered not in heaven, but in earth's struggle. This was not the same blade he had exchanged with the Amaterasu. This one would carry different meaning. It would travel. It would become symbol. But for now, it remained silent. The valley began to feel different. Not immediately transformed, but unburdened. The mist lifted slightly. The river resumed its quiet movement. Susanoo turned toward Kushinada Hime. The storm within him had shifted, not gone, but redirected. Exile had not diminished him. It had refined him. He had once disrupted sacred order in heaven. Now he had restored safety on earth. The arc was subtle but real. Storm had learned discipline, and in that discipline, a new phase began. The sword within chaos. The serpent lay still in the valley, 8 heads no longer rising, 8 tails no longer coiling through grass and stone. The earth, which had grown accustomed to its weight, seemed to settle into unfamiliar quiet. Susanoo stood beside the severed body. The blade he had drawn from within the tail rested in his hand. It did not glow. It did not hum with celestial light. It felt solid, balanced, forged not in heaven, but hidden inside destruction. Kusanagi. The name would come later. In that moment it was simply revelation. Chaos had concealed power. The serpent had not only consumed, it had carried. For years, Orochi had been feared as unending terror, yet within its body had lain a weapon of order. This is one of the quiet patterns of myth. What appears only destructive often contains unrecognized potential. Storm had cut through chaos, but chaos had yielded something enduring. The old couple approached him carefully. Kushinada Haim stood between them. Her fear had not disappeared instantly. Relief moves more slowly than danger. Susanoo did not present himself as conqueror. He did not demand reverence. He offered presence. The storm that had once unsettled heaven now stood grounded in valley soil. He looked across the land. The mountains did not shift for him. The river did not change course. Earth accepts action without spectacle. He turned his thoughts upward, to the high plain, to the sister whose light he had strained. The sword in his hand carried weight beyond its steel. He understood something now that he had not before. Power without direction fractures. Power aligned with purpose restores. He sent the sword to Amaterasu, not as surrender, not as apology declared aloud, as offering, a recognition that what had been discovered on earth belonged also within heaven's balance. Storm returned something to light. In doing so, the arc between them shifted. The high plane would receive the blade, and in time, it would become one of the 3 sacred treasures. But here, in the valley, its meaning was simpler. It was the proof that exile had not erased him. It had reshaped him. He remained on earth. He did not attempt to ascend immediately. He built. He formed alliance with Kushinada Haim. He established dwelling. The storm that once roamed without direction began to root. Wind can settle without losing strength. Cloud can move without destroying. In marriage, in dwelling, in continuity, Susanoo entered a new phase. Not merely force, not merely reaction, participation. The valley where fear had repeated now held the possibility of stability. The old couple's line would not end. The rhythm of loss had been interrupted. This is the subtle shift that marks Act 2. Creation in heaven had been cosmic. Loss in Yomi had been structural. But here, on earth, restoration became local, specific, embodied. The sword, now in heaven, would join mirror and jewel in time. Reflection, connection, and force, disciplined. These 3 would travel through generations, not as decoration, as reminders. But for now, Susanoo stood beneath open sky, the storm within him quieter, not extinguished, integrated. The serpent's blood darkened the soil. Yet, from that soil, life would continue. Destruction had yielded weapon. Exile had yielded purpose. Grief had yielded direction. The pattern of the world grew more intricate. Heaven above, earth below. Yomi sealed, storm disciplined. And in the distance, other forces waited. Governance of land would not remain unclaimed. The earth was not empty. Its valleys and mountains would require more than intervention. They would require stewardship. The story was widening, from cosmic separation to local restoration, from grief to responsibility. The sword had been drawn from chaos. Now balance would need to be maintained not by cutting alone, but by consent. Compassion and the hare. The valley where the serpent once lay grew quiet. Storm had found direction. The sword had been sent upward. Balance for the moment held. But the earth was wide. It did not belong to a single valley. It did not remain shaped by one intervention. Beyond the mountains, beyond river bends and misted plains, another story unfolded. Not of sudden terror, not of 8 heads rising in the night, but of smaller cruelty, less dramatic, no less revealing. Along a stretch of coast, where waves pressed steadily against sand, a hare once lived. Quick-footed, restless. It had crossed water to escape predators on a distant island. It had done so through cunning, convincing a line of crocodiles to form a bridge across the sea. It ran across their backs, counting them aloud, mocking their number. When it reached the far shore, it revealed the trick. The crocodiles, angered, stripped the hare of its fur, left raw skin exposed to salt wind. The hare crawled inland, its body burning from exposure. It came upon a group of princes traveling across the land. They were sons of a powerful figure, Okunenushi's elder brothers, proud, self-assured, concerned with appearance. The hare begged for help. The princes laughed. They advised it to bathe in salt water and dry itself in the wind. The salt deepened its pain. The wind hardened its wounds. The cruelty was not monstrous. It was careless. Soon after, Okunenushi himself approached. He was not the eldest, not the most celebrated, but he paused. He observed. The hare did not appear foolish to him. It appeared wounded. He asked what had happened. He listened. And instead of mockery, he offered instruction aligned with healing. Bathe in fresh water. Roll in the pollen of reeds. Let the softness restore you. The hare followed his guidance. The pain lessened. Skin recovered. Fur returned. Compassion had accomplished what pride had failed to. This moment did not shake mountains. It did not alter the sky, yet it marked something important. Governance of land is not only strength against serpents, it is attention to the small. Okunenushi's brothers moved on. They continued toward a distant princess whose hand they sought. They valued appearance. They valued status. Okunenushi followed behind them, not as rival in spectacle, but as presence attentive to detail. The hare, restored, spoke before parting. It predicted that the princess would choose not the proud brothers, but Okunenushi. Prophecy in myth often arises from gratitude. Compassion alters future direction. The story shifts here, from storm and blade to discernment. Okunenushi was not born from fire, not born from purification. He was of earth, rooted in its texture. His path would not be defined by sudden confrontation, but by endurance. The land he would shape required more than cutting. It required listening. As the princes reached the princess's dwelling, they displayed confidence. Their garments were fine, their posture assured. Okunenushi arrived humbly, but the princess looked beyond surface. She chose him. The brothers were angered, their pride wounded. They would test him. Again and again, compassion does not exempt one from trial. Often it invites it. The hare's healing was small in the scale of myth, but it signaled something deeper. The earth was ready for governance, shaped by care. Storm had disciplined chaos. Now the land would require patience. Okunenushi stood at the threshold of trials yet to come. His compassion had aligned him with a quieter strength, and in that quiet strength the future of the land began to take form. Trials in the underworld. Compassion had not protected Okunenushi from envy. His brothers had watched the princess choose him. They had heard the hare's quiet prophecy, and something hardened within them. Pride, when unexamined, does not fade. It seeks correction through humiliation. They devised tests, not openly declared as trials, but framed as tasks. On a mountainside, they told him to retrieve a boar they claimed was descending in flame. What rolled toward him was not animal, but heated stone. He was struck, his body broken. The brothers did not grieve, they continued. But death, in this phase of myth, no longer ended movement. His mother wept. She sought aid from the heavens. Through intervention, Okuninushi was restored. He rose again. Restoration did not soften his resolve. The brothers tried again. They sent him into a field and set it alight. Flames advanced, smoke closed in. There was no clear path outward, but within the burning field, a small mouse spoke. "Step here, there is space below." He found a hollow, a narrow chamber beneath earth. The fire passed overhead. When it subsided, he emerged alive. Compassion given to a hare returned as guidance from a mouse. Kindness echoes. The brothers saw his survival and hardened further. They abandoned him, left him to wander alone. It was then that his path crossed with another realm. He encountered Susanoo. The storm that had once unsettled heaven now resided below, in a domain between earth and shadow. This was not Yomi, not sealed by stone, but a deep place, a realm of trials and cunning. Susanoo did not greet him warmly. Storm recognizes potential with suspicion. Okuninushi had married Kushinada Haim's kin. He had entered lineage touched by storm. Now he stood before its source. Susanoo tested him, not through conversation, through ordeal. He was sent to sleep in a chamber filled with serpents, coiled, silent, waiting. Fear is immediate in such space. But Kushinada Haim's daughter, Suseri Haim, had seen him. She had recognized his steadiness. She gave him a scarf imbued with protection. He lay among the serpents. He remained still. The scarf shielded him. Morning came. The serpents had not struck. Trial continued. Susanoo sent him into a room filled with centipedes and wasps. Venom thickened the air. Again, the scarf shielded him. Again, he endured. Storm does not test lightly, it tests for resilience. Finally, Susanoo sent him to retrieve an arrow shot into a distant field. As he searched, Susanoo set the field ablaze. Flame closed around him. This mirrored the earlier trial set by his brothers, but he had learned. He listened. Again, a small creature, a mouse, guided him. He found space beneath earth. The fire passed. He emerged with the arrow. Susanoo observed. Storm had once been uncontrolled grief. Now it evaluated endurance. Okuninushi did not defeat Susanoo by force. He survived, he listened, he adapted. Eventually, through patience and cunning, he won Suseri Haim's trust. Together, they devised escape. They took with them Susanoo's bow, his arrows, and the great sword. As they fled, Susanoo pursued. But Okuninushi used the bow to create delay. Distance widened. Storm did not overtake him. Instead, from afar, Susanoo called out. He did not curse, he acknowledged, "Build the land well." It was not surrender, it was recognition. The trials had revealed steadiness. Okuninushi had passed through fire, venom, and deception. Not as conqueror, as participant who endured. He emerged not only with weapons but with legitimacy. Compassion had been his beginning. Resilience had become his proof. The land awaited shaping. Not through cutting alone, through patience. Consent and the transfer of rule. Okuninushi returned to the land not as a wanderer, not as a tested youth, but as one who had endured. The trials beneath Susanoo's domain had not hardened him into severity. They had clarified him. He had known fire. He had known venom. He had known abandonment. And yet, he did not rule through fear. He began to shape the land with deliberation. Fields were organized, paths were marked. Where jealousy had burned fields, irrigation channels guided water. He did not dominate the land. He participated in its rhythm. This is why he came to be known as Master of the Great Land. Not because he seized it, but because he tended it. The kami of the earth recognized his steadiness. The creatures of field and forest did not flee at his approach. Governance, in this stage of myth, was not imperial proclamation. It was alignment. Yet above, in the high plain, another perspective formed. Amaterasu observed the earth below. Storm had been disciplined. Compassion had shaped governance, but the descent of heaven had not yet occurred. The land, though tended, was not yet under celestial order. Heaven does not always move immediately. It considers. Messengers were sent downward. They spoke to Okunanushi. They did not threaten at first. They stated intention. The land of reed plains was destined for the descendants of heaven. Would he yield it? The question was not small. Okunanushi had shaped this land. He had endured to stabilize it. Yielding is not effortless. He did not answer alone. He consulted his sons. One resisted. Another agreed. Deliberation preceded decision. This moment is subtle but essential. Power is rarely surrendered without fracture. But here, something different occurred. Okunanushi did not choose to wage war against heaven. He did not summon storm. He did not draw sword. Instead, he requested one condition: that a grand palace be built for him where he could dwell in honor. Not in exile, not in obscurity, but in acknowledgement. Consent is not defeat, it is transition. Heaven accepted. A great shrine would rise, later remembered as Izumo. There he would reside, not erased from the land, not forgotten, integrated. The transfer of rule did not occur through battle. It occurred through agreement. The land passed from stewardship of earth to the lineage of heaven. Okunanushi stepped aside without destroying what he had built. This is governance shaped by restraint. Storm had once resisted heaven. Now earth aligned with it. The architecture of the world grew more complex. Heaven above, earth below. Yomi sealed, storm disciplined, compassion proven, and now consent. The three treasures remained in heaven: mirror, jewel, sword. Soon they would descend. Okunanushi stood at the threshold of relinquishment. He did not appear diminished. He appeared complete. To yield after shaping is not weakness. It is understanding one's place in a larger pattern. The land was not ending. It was entering a new phase. He watched as messengers returned upward. The decision carried. Heaven prepared. The high plain stirred. The descendant who would carry mirror, jewel, and sword would soon step onto earth. Okunanushi turned toward the shrine being raised for him, its pillars thick, its roof high. It would stand as memory that governance of earth had once been shaped by compassion. The transfer was complete. Balance had not fractured, it had shifted. And with that shift, the story widened again. Heaven would descend. The three treasures. The high plane of heaven did not rush. When Okunanushi consented, when the land was yielded without war, the sky above did not erupt. It prepared. Heaven moves differently than storm. It aligns before it descends. Amaterasu considered the earth below. It had been shaped by compassion, stabilized through endurance, yielded without fracture. Now it would receive celestial lineage. But heaven does not descend empty-handed. Authority must carry reminder. Before the chosen descendant stepped forward, three objects were gathered: the mirror, the jewel, the sword. But they were not ornaments. They were not trophies. Each carried memory. The mirror had once drawn light from the cave. It had restored balance without force. It reflected truth without distortion. To hold it was to remember that clarity precedes action. The jewel had symbolized connection, strung upon sacred tree branches outside the cave's mouth. It had bound the gathered kami together. To carry it was to remember that authority without relation isolates itself. The sword had emerged from chaos, drawn from within the serpent's tail. It was not born in heaven. It had been discovered on earth. To wield it was to remember that force must be disciplined. Reflection, connection, power. These three formed the structure of rule. The descendant chosen to carry them was Ninigi no Mikoto, grandson of Amaterasu. He did not stride forward as a conqueror. He bowed. Inheritance is weight. The treasures were entrusted to him not with command, but with instruction. Look into the mirror as though you were looking into me. The words were not metaphor alone. They were warning. Authority without reflection becomes distortion. The jewel was placed in his keeping, a reminder that heaven and earth must remain bound in dialogue. The sword rested at his side, not to dominate immediately, but to act when imbalance requires response. The high plane grew quiet. The descent approached. He would not go alone. Other kami would accompany him. The land below was vast. It would require more than one presence to root celestial order within it. Ninigi stepped toward the floating bridge of heaven. Once it had been threshold of creation, then of descent into grief. Now it became pathway of governance. The earth below did not tremble. It waited. The valley of Serpent was quiet. The shrine of Okunanushi stood newly raised. The architecture was prepared. The descent was not a fall, it was transition. As Ninigi moved downward, the light of heaven did not vanish behind him. It thinned into atmosphere. He carried its orientation within the mirror's surface. Clouds parted gradually. Mountains sharpened in view. The land did not appear hostile. It appeared open. Yet openness is not emptiness. Ninigi would not shape earth from nothing. He would enter a world already touched by grief, by storm, by compassion. Heaven does not erase what earth has learned. It builds upon it. The three treasures gleamed faintly, not in spectacle, in meaning. The mirror would ensure that heaven's descendant remembered humility. The jewel would bind his rule to continuity. The sword would guard against recurrence of chaos unrestrained. The descent marked a new alignment. The world that had begun in suspension now entered inheritance. Heaven above, earth below, and between them, lineage. The high plane watched, the earth received. The bridge between realms fulfilled another purpose. The descent had begun. Ninigi descended gently. Cloud thinned around him. Mountain peaks rose into view. The land stretched outward in quiet expectation. He did not arrive to emptiness. He arrived to continuity. Rivers already flowed. Forests already breathed. Shrines already marked the memory of consent. The three treasures rested with him: mirror, jewel, sword. He walked upon the earth not as its first ruler, but as its next. It was upon a mountainside that he encountered her, Konohana Sakuya Hime. Her presence did not blaze like her grandmother's light. It did not churn like storm. It unfolded, like blossom opening at the edge of spring. She stood beside her father, a deity of mountain. The encounter was not thunderous. It was recognition. Ninigi asked for her hand. The mountain deity responded with generosity. He offered not only Konohana Saikuya Hime, but also her elder sister, Iwanaga Hime, a stone princess. If Konohana embodied blossom, Iwanaga embodied rock. Endurance, unyielding time, mountain's quiet permanence. The offer was deliberate. To accept both was to bind the line of heaven to both beauty and durability. But Ninigi chose only Konohana Sakuya Hime. He sent Iwanaga back, not with cruelty, with preference. Blossom over stone. The mountain deity did not rage, he spoke calmly. Had Ninigi accepted both daughters, his descendants would have endured like stone, unfading, unaging. But because he chose only Blossom, his lineage would be like flowers. Brilliant, brief. Mortality entered fully at that moment. Not through fire alone, not through vow at stone, through choice. The descendant of heaven had chosen transience. This was not error in haste, it was orientation toward beauty. Blossoms do not last long, but in their briefness they demand attention. The decision altered the arc of rule. Heaven's line would not be eternal. It would live within cycle. Birth, flourish, decline. The mirror, jewel, and sword did not prevent this. They guided it. Konohana Sakuya Hime accepted Ninigi. Their union did not unfold without tension. When she later bore children swiftly, Ninigi doubted. Time felt too short. Suspicion entered. She responded not with argument but with demonstration. She built a chamber of reeds, set it ablaze around herself, declared that if the children were truly Ninigi's, they would survive the fire. Flames rose, smoke thickened, the chamber burned. From within the blaze, children were born, unharmed. Fire, once destructive in Izanami's death, now became proof of legitimacy. Mortality had entered lineage, but doubt had been burned away. The children would carry forward both blossom and flame. The high plane watched, the earth received. The choice between blossom and stone had shaped destiny. Heaven had not commanded this. Ninigi had decided. Authority does not eliminate consequence. It invites it. The line that would one day claim emperorship would age. It would pass. It would renew. Not in endless stone-like permanence, but in seasonal return. The mountain remained. Iwanaga remained. Stone does not vanish when unchosen. It simply stands apart. Blossoms fall, stone endures. Ninigi's lineage would hold tension between them. This was not tragedy, it was pattern. The world that began in suspension now deepened in complexity. Heaven had descended. Consent had been honored. Mortality had been confirmed. The three treasures rested quietly. Reflection, connection, power. Soon, the line would continue downward through sea and shore, and the rhythm of cycle would shape it further. The flames around the birthing chamber eventually subsided. Smoke thinned into mountain air. The reeds collapsed into ash. Konohana Sakuya Hime stepped from the ruins with her children alive in her arms. Fire had not consumed them. It had clarified them. Doubt had been present only briefly. It did not survive the blaze. Ninigi understood then that his suspicion had been unnecessary. Mortality does not mean fragility without strength. Blossoms are delicate, yet they endure wind and frost for the time allotted to them. From their union came 3 sons. Their names would be remembered, but what mattered more was continuity. The line of heaven now ran through earth with confirmed transience. This was no longer theoretical, no longer implied by vow at stone. It was embodied. Children born. Children who would age. Children who would inherit not eternity, but cycle. And the 3 treasures remained near, mirror reflecting without distortion, jewel binding lineage to origin, sword resting with measured presence. None of them prevented time. They guided conduct within it. Ninigi ruled not as immortal flame, but as living descendant. Seasons passed. Rice ripened and was harvested. Storms gathered and dispersed. Konohana Sakuya Hime's blossoms fell and returned. The mountain still stood. Iwanaga Hime remained unchosen yet not erased. Stone and blossom coexisted. Endurance and beauty. Ninigi's reign did not eliminate tension between heaven and earth. It navigated it. Mortality changes how one governs. An immortal ruler might delay action indefinitely. A mortal ruler must decide within limited span. The awareness of ending sharpens attention. It tempers excess. The children grew. From them, further generations would emerge. And within those generations, divergence would begin. Not all would choose the same domain. Some would prefer sea. Some would prefer mountain. Lineage does not move in a straight line. It branches. Two brothers would later stand at the edge of water, Hoderi, Huri. One attuned to the sea's rhythm, the other to land's quiet slope. Their story had not yet begun, but the condition for it had been established here. Mortality made rivalry possible. Choice made divergence inevitable. The world that began in suspension had become layered. Separation, connection, cycle, consent, mortality. Each addition did not replace the previous. It deepened it. Ninigi aged. His presence did not fade suddenly. It softened. Authority passed not through vanishing, but through succession. The mirror reflected new faces. The jewel bound new bonds. The sword remained sheathed more often than drawn. Heaven's descent had not frozen time. It had entered it. The architecture of rule now included inheritance. Blossoms fall, children rise, storm quiets, storm returns. The land of reed plains did not remain static. It breathed with the lives upon it. As Ninigi's sons matured, they observed different horizons. One listened to the tide. One walked the slope of mountain. Preference is subtle at first, but it grows. The choice between blossom and stone had set the condition. Now, choice between sea and land would continue the pattern. Mortality had been confirmed. Not as curse, as rhythm, and rhythm would carry the lineage forward into deeper waters. Generations unfolded quietly. Ninigi's sons grew into their own domains. Their children inherited not only land, but preference. Mortality had entered the line. With it came distinction. Two brothers stood at the edge of that distinction, Hoderi and Huri. Hoderi favored the sea. He understood the language of tide. He read the wind across water. His hands were steady with net and hook. Huri preferred the mountain. He moved along slopes with quiet focus. He tracked deer through undergrowth. His bow responded to his grip. They were not enemies, they were different. Difference, when acknowledged, strengthens structure. Difference, when tested, reveals tension. One day, in the rhythm of ordinary exchange, Huri proposed something simple. Let them trade tools. He would take the fishing hook. Hoderi would take the bow. It was curiosity, not challenge. But tools are not neutral. They are extensions of identity. Hoderi hesitated. The hook had shaped his skill. The sea had answered to its weight. Still, he agreed. Huri stepped to the shoreline. He cast the line into water with motion learned from watching, not from practice. The sea does not respond to imitation. The line slackened. The current shifted. The hook disappeared into depth. Huri pulled the line upward. It returned empty. He cast again and again, but the hook was gone. The sea does not easily release what has sunk. Huri searched the shallows. He waded deeper. He traced the arc of his casting. Nothing. When he returned to his brother, he did not conceal it. He spoke plainly. The hook was lost. Hoderi did not respond with violence. He responded with insistence. The hook was not merely metal. It was inheritance. It was rhythm learned through repetition. Replace it. Huri broke his own sword, fashioned 500 hooks from its fragments, offered them. Hoderi refused. Replacement is not restoration. He demanded the original. The tension between them was not loud. It was firm. Sea and mountain stood in contrast. Huri returned to the shore. He stared into water that did not answer. Mortality had introduced rivalry. Choice had introduced divergence. Now, consequence entered. He considered diving blindly, but depth is not conquered by force. As he stood in uncertainty, an old man approached. A small boat drifting near shore. He listened to Huri's explanation. He did not mock. He did not dismiss the loss as trivial. He suggested something different. The hook had fallen into realm beyond ordinary depth. The sea contains thresholds, not only water and sand, but passage. He instructed Huri to follow a certain current, to trust its pull. Descent would not require struggle, it would require surrender to direction. Huri hesitated. The stone at Yomi had sealed death. The descent of heaven had shaped land. Now he would descend into sea. Each realm carries risk. Yet he agreed. He entered the water. The surface closed above him. Light filtered downward. Not extinguished, but altered. Depth carries its own silence. The current guided him further than breath alone would allow. And then, before him, structure, not ruin, not wreckage, a palace. Columns shaped from coral, roofs shimmering like scales. Light refracted through water. The domain of the sea god. The threshold had opened. Above, the shore remained. Below, another realm began. The lost hook had led him not merely into conflict with his brother, but into deeper inheritance. The pattern widened again. Heaven above, earth below, sea beneath, and within the sea, kingdom. Water did not crush him. It did not choke the breath from his chest. Instead, it parted, not violently, gradually. The pressure he expected never fully arrived. Light filtered downward in muted strands, not bright as sun above shore, but refracted, broken into softer fragments. Before him rose the palace, its pillars formed from coral shaped over time rather than carved. Its walls shimmered faintly with the motion of passing currents. Roof lines curved like scales catching dim light. The sea had not been empty depth. It had been layered. Huri stepped forward cautiously. He was received not by hostility, but by quiet observation. Servants of the sea moved around him, fish of unusual hue, creatures shaped by depth and pressure, and then the presence at the center, Watatsumi, the sea god, not roaring like storm, not blinding like sun, steady, measured. His gaze did not accuse, it assessed. Huri bowed. He did not hide his purpose. He spoke of the hook, of the exchange between brothers, of the demand that could not be satisfied. Watatsumi listened. There was no impatience in his posture. Depth does not rush. When Huri finished, the sea god did not immediately summon armies of fish. He invited him to remain. Rest first, speak later. Time beneath water moves differently. The urgency that burned at shoreline softened in the palace. Days passed, or what felt like days. Without sun's arc, measurement becomes internal. Huri found himself walking corridors of coral, observing schools of fish move like shifting tapestry, listening to currents move through stone. He encountered Toyotama Haim, daughter of Watatsumi. Her presence did not flash like lightning. It moved like tide, composed, fluid. She did not question his intrusion. She regarded him as one who had crossed threshold legitimately. They spoke often, not only of the lost hook, but of surface wind, of mountain slope, of differences between realms. Huri felt something unfamiliar. The urgency to return began to loosen. Grief between brothers felt distant. The palace offered continuity without rivalry. In time, affection deepened. Marriage followed, not announced in spectacle, but accepted. Years passed, or something like years. Time and depth does not carve itself into clear increments. Huri lived beneath waves. The hook remained unresolved, but it no longer pressed. Comfort can soften memory, yet memory does not disappear. One day, while watching light fracture through surface above, Huri remembered. The shoreline. Hoderi's demand. The broken sword fashioned into 500 hooks. The refusal. He spoke of it to Toyotama Haim. She did not respond with alarm. She brought him to her father. Watatsumi summoned the creatures of the sea. They gathered in shifting formation. He asked which among them had swallowed a hook of human craft. One fish hesitated, a bream. Within its mouth the hook was found. It had rested there quietly. The sea had not destroyed it. It had held it. Watatsumi returned the hook to Huri. But he did not send him back empty-handed. He presented 2 jewels, one that summoned the tide forward, one that commanded it to recede. "These are not weapons," he said. "They are measures. To raise water without drowning, to lower water without abandoning. Control tempered by restraint." Huri accepted them. The palace did not collapse behind him. Toyotama Haim chose to follow him to land. Sea and shore would meet again. As they rose toward surface, light sharpened. Pressure eased. The palace receded into depth. The sea had not kept him captive. It had held him until memory returned. The lost hook had been found. But something else had been gained. Perspective. Depth had altered him. Above, the shore waited. And with it, unfinished tension. The surface of the sea broke quietly. Light sharpened. Wind returned. Huri stepped again onto shore. Toyotama Haim followed beside him. The palace beneath waves receded into memory, but it did not vanish. He carried the hook. He carried the tide jewels. The shoreline had not changed in shape, but he had. Hoderi awaited him. Not with embrace, with expectation. Huri returned the hook without embellishment. He did not recount the palace and spectacle. He did not boast of marriage. He simply handed back what had been lost. Hoderi took it. The tension between them did not dissolve, but it shifted. The tide jewels remained concealed. Later, when rivalry stirred again, Huri would use them. He would summon water forward, then draw it back. He would demonstrate that depth had taught him measure. Hoderi would submit, not through humiliation, but through recognition. A storm between brothers settled into hierarchy. But another threshold approached. Toyotama Haim had lived beneath waves. Land required adjustment. Time moved differently above sea. She carried within her new life. When her time to give birth approached, she spoke to Huri. "I will bear our child, but you must not look upon me while I do." The request echoed older patterns. Yomi had required restraint. Light in the cave had required patience. Now sea carried its own boundary. Huri agreed. He prepared a birthing hut of reeds. The structure stood near shore. Wind moved gently through it. He waited outside. Promise rests easily at first, but curiosity grows. The sound from within shifted. Not cry of distress, not scream of agony. Something unfamiliar. Memory of Yomi's warning might have stirred within him. But curiosity often masks itself as concern. He parted the reeds. He looked. Toyotama Haim was no longer in human form. She had returned to her true nature, a great sea creature, scaled and immense. Her body moved with tidal rhythm. Her form was not monstrous. It was authentic. In that moment of looking, the boundary fractured. She saw him. Recognition passed between them, not rage, disappointment. "You have seen me." The phrase carried the weight of repetition. Threshold crossed, promise broken. The child was born safely. But Toyotama Haim did not remain. She entrusted the infant to her sister. She returned to the sea. The shoreline did not shatter. No storm rose in fury, but absence returned. Hori stood once more between realms, not as father seeking lost hook, not as youth exploring depth, as one who had broken trust. The motif deepened. Izanagi had looked in Yomi. Hori had looked in the birthing hut. Curiosity against instruction, sight against boundary, the child grew. He would be called Ugaya Fukiezu, raised not by the mother who bore him, but by her sister. Land would shape him. Sea would remain distant. The jewels of tide remained in Hori's keeping. He did not use them recklessly. He had learned that control without restraint fractures relationship. The shoreline continued its rhythm, wave advancing, wave receding. Hori aged. Mortality, chosen generations earlier, moved forward. The child would inherit not only treasures but pattern, descent, boundary, sight, loss, yet also continuity. Heaven above, earth below, sea beneath. Lineage threading through all three. The broken promise did not undo the palace. It did not erase depth. It marked another separation, one that would echo quietly through generations. The sea retained its own laws, land retained its own, and between them stood a child who would one day carry both. Ugaya Fukiezu did not grow beneath waves, he grew beneath open sky. His mother had returned to the sea. His father remained on land. His aunt became his guardian. From the beginning, his life was shaped by absence and continuity intertwined. He carried sea in blood, he carried mountain in memory, he carried heaven in lineage. The three treasures remained distant in heaven, yet their meaning threaded downward. Mirror, reflection, jewel, connection. Sword, discipline. Though he did not hold them in hand, their structure defined his inheritance. He grew into adulthood, not with spectacle, but with awareness. Mortality had been confirmed generations earlier. Choice had shaped lineage. Consent had transferred rule. Now, inheritance required movement. Ugaya Fukiezu fathered sons. Among them, one would stand out. Kamuyamato Iwarabiko, later remembered as Jimmu. Names matter less than orientation. He did not begin as emperor. He began as descendant. The land he inherited was not unified. Valleys held separate authority. Mountains guarded their own people. Rivers defined boundaries not yet agreed upon. Lineage from heaven does not guarantee immediate order. It invites effort. Jimmu looked eastward. The sun rose there. Amaterasu's radiance began there each morning. Orientation toward east was not mere geography. It was symbolic return. He did not declare conquest lightly. He gathered brothers and allies. Movement began from Kyushu's edge. Boats along coastline. Marches through forested terrain. The journey was not swift. Mountains resisted passage. Local leaders defended territory. Mortality meant vulnerability. The descent of heaven had not erased resistance. It had complicated it. Some early battles were lost. Arrows found their mark. Storms rose unexpectedly. Jimmu recognized something subtle. To move eastward against the sun's path was misalignment. He adjusted course. He chose to advance with the sun behind him, not against it. Orientation matters, not only in geography, in intention. As they traveled, hardship thinned numbers. Not all who began the journey would finish it. Mortality carried cost into expansion, yet perseverance remained. The land was not enemy. It was terrain to be understood. Rivers were crossed through negotiation. Some leaders joined rather than resisted. The eastward movement was not continuous war. It was layered effort. He carried with him awareness of sea, memory of stone, pattern of blossom. Storm had been disciplined. Consent had shaped governance. Now lineage would attempt consolidation. The weight of inheritance is not crown, it is burden. To unify without erasing, to lead without severing root. Jimmu's path eventually brought him to Yamato, a region fertile and central. Mountains curved protectively around it. Waterways nourished its soil. He recognized its suitability. Settlement there would not be temporary. It would anchor lineage. But arrival does not end effort. Local resistance persisted. In victory required alignment not only with sword, but with belief. The stories of descent from heaven were invoked, not to dominate, to legitimize. Lineage provided narrative cohesion where geography alone could not. When Jimmu finally secured Yamato, it was not triumph in isolation. It was culmination of movement shaped by mortality. He had lost companions. He had endured setbacks. He had adjusted course. The rising sun over Yamato carried new meaning. Heaven had descended long ago. Consent had transferred land. Sea had shaped depth. Now eastward settlement would ground imperial memory. The weight of inheritance had found place to rest. But weight does not disappear. It settles into structure. And structure, once formed, must be sustained. The journey east had not been linear. Mountains did not part simply because lineage claimed descent from heaven. Rivers did not alter their flow out of reverence. Jimmu had adjusted his path more than once. He had learned that direction matters as much as strength. But there are moments in myth when effort alone is insufficient. After a difficult campaign through rugged terrain, his forces weakened. Fog hung low in valleys. Paths blurred into indistinction. Even the rising sun felt distant. It was in such uncertainty that guidance appeared. Not in thunder, not in blazing descent. A crow, large, dark against morning light. It did not cry loudly. It did not circle wildly. It moved with purpose. 3 legs were said to define it. Not deformity, symbol. Heaven, earth, human. Alignment of realms in motion. The crow did not command. It flew forward, paused, waited, then moved again. Jimmu observed. He did not worship the bird immediately. He watched its pattern. Where it flew, terrain proved passable. Where it paused, water sources were near. Where it turned, resistance lessened. Guidance in myth rarely forces obedience. It invites trust. The crow became orientation, not replacement for effort, confirmation of it. The army followed. Paths that had seemed closed opened subtly. Ridges gave way to traversable slopes. Opposition fragmented. The crow did not remove hardship, it refined direction, Yatagarasu, later remembered by name. But in that moment, it was simply presence, a reminder that heaven's descent had not severed communication. Mirror, jewel, and sword remained distant symbols. The crow was immediate, living sign. Jimmu did not declare himself emperor yet. He moved step by step. Mortality still defined his body. Fatigue still marked his companions. But alignment strengthened resolve. When they reached the region of Kumano, terrain shifted. Dense forest, hidden ravines. Without guidance, confusion would have deepened. With the crow, orientation held. The symbolism deepened gradually. 3 legs, 3 realms united. Heaven's intention, Earth's terrain, human will, conquest, when aligned with all 3, transforms into settlement. The crow eventually vanished. Not in flash. It simply ceased appearing. Guidance does not linger beyond necessity. Jimmu's forces no longer wandered. They moved with clarity. When final resistance in Yamato was confronted, victory did not feel miraculous. It felt earned. The crow had not fought battles. It had revealed path. Heaven's involvement did not negate human effort. It confirmed it. In later generations, the image of Amaterasu would remain powerful, not as creature to summon at whim, but as memory of alignment. Leadership requires more than lineage. It requires orientation. The eastward journey culminated not in annihilation of others, but in establishment of center. Yamato became more than geography. It became anchor. Sun rising across its fields echoed descent from heaven. The crow's work was complete. Heaven had guided. Earth had resisted and yielded. Human will had endured. 3 realms aligned, briefly, precisely enough. Yamato did not declare itself center. It revealed suitability. Mountains curved around it like protective hands. Rivers braided across fertile plains. Mist rose gently in early light. After long movement eastward, after hardship and recalibration, arrival did not feel like conquest. It felt like alignment. Jimmu stood upon the land not as invader, but as one who had followed pattern to its resting point. The rising sun moved across the valley with quiet regularity. Amaterasu's light touched Yamato without obstruction. Symbol and terrain met. Settlement began not with proclamation, but with construction. Dwellings raised, fields measured, paths defined. Boundaries were not drawn sharply at first, they were negotiated. Some local leaders accepted integration, others required persuasion. The sword existed, but it was not drawn unnecessarily. Mirror and jewel remained guiding metaphors. Reflection before action. Connection before command. Imperial authority did not descend as absolute, it rooted. Mortality required succession planning. Leadership could not rely on endless rule. It required structure capable of continuity. Rituals were established, not as ornament, as rhythm. Seasonal observances aligned with agricultural cycles. Offerings made not only to heaven, but to land. Heaven's descent generations earlier had not erased Earth's autonomy. It had interwoven with it. The story of descent from the high plane was repeated, not as boast, as cohesion. Narrative binds where geography divides. Yamato became more than fertile valley. It became axis, heaven above, earth below, imperial house between. The memory of sea lingered in lineage. The memory of stone lingered in mortality. The memory of storm lingered in caution. The architecture of the world, layered across chapters of myth, now concentrated in governance. Jimmu did not claim perfection. He claimed position aligned with sunrise, with guidance received, with consent inherited. Over time, the notion of emperor would crystallize, not simply as ruler, as descendant, link between realms. This idea would outlast individuals. Mortality would carry each body forward into decline, but institution would remain. Blossom, chosen long ago, ensured that no single life endured endlessly. Instead, renewal would occur through succession. The cave had taught reflection. Yomi had taught boundary. The sea had taught depth. The mountain had taught endurance. Yamato gathered these lessons into center. As seasons passed, children were born within settlement. They would grow not knowing the full hardship of eastward journey. They would inherit stability as given. Stability often conceals effort that formed it. The crow was no longer seen. Its work had been done. Now guidance would come through tradition, through story, through ritual repetition. The 3 treasures remained symbols at heart of imperial identity. Mirror, to see oneself clearly. Jewel, to bind community. Sword, to act when necessary. Yamato's settlement marked transition. Movement had ceased. Foundation began. The arc, from suspension to structure to cycle to consent to mortality to guidance, had found anchor. But anchoring is not ending. It is beginning of maintenance. The imperial house would rise and fall in strength. conflicts would emerge in future generations. But the center held. Yamato became memory made visible. And from that memory, history would begin to weave itself around myth. Yamato stood. Mountains did not move around it. Rivers did not change course, but something less visible began to form. Ritual, movement had ceased, settlement had begun. Now repetition would stabilize memory. Myth, when first told, explains origin. Ritual, when repeated, sustains it. The imperial house did not rely solely on descent from heaven. It relied on enactment. Season after season, offerings were made. Rice presented to unseen presence. Water poured with deliberate gesture. Words spoken in patterns remembered precisely. The mirror was not displayed as ornament. It was approached with stillness. To look into it was to be reminded that authority requires self-recognition. A ruler who cannot reflect cannot govern. The jewel symbolized continuity, not merely bloodline, relationship. Between ruler and land, between ruler and people, connection must be maintained, not assumed. The sword rested often unseen. Its presence was acknowledged even when not drawn. Power restrained strengthens legitimacy. Authority thus became layered. It was not only force, it was not only inheritance, it was performance aligned with memory. The descent of Ninigi was recited. The consent of Okunanushi remembered. The cave of Amaterasu invoked in ritual form. Each mythic episode transformed into structural reinforcement. The emperor did not claim to be deity in isolation. He claimed alignment. Alignment with heaven's origin. Alignment with earth's stability. Alignment with sea's depth. This alignment required maintenance. Mortality ensured that no single ruler embodied permanence. Succession became ritualized. Transition between reigns marked by ceremony. Grief acknowledged. Continuity affirmed. In this way, mortality, once introduced through Blossom, became institutional rhythm. Authority without ritual becomes brittle. Ritual without authority becomes hollow. The balance required both. Over time, external threats would arise. Internal disputes would test cohesion. But ritual provided anchor. Even when political strength fluctuated, ceremony maintained narrative. The mirror continued to symbolize clarity. The jewel connection. The sword disciplined action. These were not abstractions. They shaped expectation. A ruler who acted without reflection risked misalignment. A ruler who severed connection risked isolation. A ruler who wielded sword without restraint risked destabilization. Ritual reminded each generation of pattern established in myth. The cave had taught withdrawal. Ritual allowed controlled withdrawal through contemplation. Yomi had sealed boundary. Ritual marked boundaries between sacred and ordinary. Sea Palace had revealed depth. Ritual preserved mystery without dissolving it. Authority thus evolved not through constant expansion, but through repetition. In repetition, memory deepens. Yamato became more than political center. It became symbolic axis. Heaven above, earth below. Imperial house mediating. The sun rose daily without ritual, yet ritual acknowledged it. Acknowledgement transforms natural cycle into cultural meaning. This was the subtle transition from myth to institution. The stories no longer unfolded in immediate dramatic events. They became frameworks. Frameworks through which history would interpret itself. The imperial line continued. Some rulers stronger, some quieter, but each stepping into structure already prepared. Authority sustained not by spectacle, but by continuity, and continuity sustained by ritual. Ritual established continuity, but continuity alone does not guarantee balance. Balance must be maintained. From the earliest separation of heaven and earth, the structure of the world had relied upon distinction: above, below, between. As myth unfolded, that simple separation became layered. Heaven descended, earth consented, sea intervened, mortality entered, authority ritualized. What remained constant was pattern. 3 realms often aligned: heaven, earth, human. The mirror, jewel, and sword echoed this triad. Reflection, heaven's clarity. Connection, earth's binding. Power, human agency. When these 3 remain aligned, stability follows. When one dominates without the others, imbalance begins. Heaven without earth becomes abstraction. Earth without heaven becomes fragmentation. Human without either becomes excess. The imperial institution functioned as mediator, not owner of heaven, not possessor of earth. Bridge. This bridging role required humility. If emperor claimed absolute divinity, mirror would distort. If emperor ignored sacred origin, jewel would loosen. If emperor relied solely on sword, cycle of storm would repeat. Balance, therefore, was fragile. Not because structure was weak, but because human choice intervenes. Mortality ensured change. Each generation faced different pressures: famine, conflict, ambition. Ritual could guide response, but not replace judgment. The pattern of balance also extended into nature: sun and moon, day and night, storm and stillness. The mythic narratives had established that none should erase the other. Amaterasu withdrew when strained. Susanoo was exiled when uncontrolled. Okuninushi yielded when alignment required it. These were not tales of domination. They were lessons of adjustment. Adjustment preserves pattern. Stubbornness fractures it. The triadic structure of heaven, earth, human can be visualized not as hierarchy, but as circulation. Heaven offers orientation. Earth offers grounding. Human offers decision. Remove one element, circulation stops. In Yamato's settled order, this circulation became less visible but no less necessary. Farmers planting rice participated in pattern. Priests conducting rites reinforced it. Rulers deciding policy influenced it. Balance thus moved through daily life, not only imperial court. Yet history would later show that balance is rarely permanent. Periods of strength would be followed by decline. Ambition could outpace reflection. Connection could weaken under strain. Sword could be drawn too readily. The pattern remained available, but awareness of it required memory. This is why stories persisted, not merely as entertainment, as reminder. The cave warns of withdrawal too deep. Yomi warns of boundary crossed. Sea warns of depth misunderstood. Mountain warns of endurance overlooked. The imperial institution stood within these warnings. Balance was not a static equilibrium, it was dynamic correction. Small shifts addressed early prevent large fractures later. The pattern of balance thus became guiding principle. Invisible, yet pervasive. In times of stability, it felt natural. In times of disruption, its absence became evident. Heaven did not constantly intervene. Earth did not always consent. Human agency remained decisive. The triad held only when each realm acknowledged the others. This was the quiet architecture beneath ritual, beneath authority, beneath memory. Balance, once named, demands responsibility. It is easier to inherit structure than to sustain it. The myths of descent and consent had become ritual. Ritual had become institution. Institution had become expectation. But expectation does not enforce itself. Each generation receives pattern as memory. Whether it remains living depends on reflection. The mirror, among the 3 treasures, is perhaps the most demanding. A sword may remain sheathed, a jewel may rest within shrine, but a mirror insists on encounter. To look is to risk seeing distortion. Authority that forgets to look begins to rely on repetition alone. Repetition without awareness becomes hollow. The emperor's role was never simply to command. It was to embody orientation, to stand between heaven and earth with consciousness of both. Responsibility lies in mediation, not in domination. When famine struck, ritual was not enough. Practical action mattered. When conflict emerged, sword might be necessary, but drawn with discipline. Reflection must precede force. The myths had demonstrated that unchecked impulse fractures harmony. Izanagi's glance altered boundary. Susanoo's unrest darkened heaven. Huri's curiosity severed union. These were not villainous acts. They were human. They remind us that even divine lineage does not exempt from consequence. Responsibility, therefore, is recognition of limit. Mortality introduced humility into structure. A ruler will age. A reign will end. Knowing this tempers excess. Knowing this invites preparation. Succession becomes more than political arrangement. It becomes ethical transition. To pass authority responsibly is to maintain pattern beyond self. Reflection also applies beyond court. Communities mirror leadership. If authority fractures balance, division spreads. If authority aligns, stability deepens. Thus, responsibility radiates outward. Heaven does not constantly correct. Earth does not automatically yield. Human action remains decisive link. The weight of inheritance does not lighten with time. It accumulates. Stories add layer to memory. Institutions add expectation. Each new generation must decide whether to inhabit them fully or to perform them mechanically. The difference is subtle, but profound. A ritual performed with awareness anchors identity. A ritual performed without awareness becomes empty form. Reflection prevents emptiness, it renews meaning. The cave once held light in withdrawal, but reflection drew it forth. In the same way, reflection can restore authority when it dims. Responsibility, then, is continuous attention. Not dramatic heroism, not perpetual conquest. Attention to alignment. Heaven's orientation, earth's grounding, human agency. When these are held in conscious balance, pattern persists. When neglected, pattern loosens. Chapter by chapter, the myth had unfolded toward structure. Now, structure required maintenance. The imperial house stood not as endpoint, but as participant in ongoing cycle. Reflection and responsibility would determine whether the pattern endured. And endurance has always remained temporary. An emperor is never only a person, he is position, structure, memory carried in human form. From the first separation of heaven and earth to the settlement in Yamato, pattern had accumulated. Each ruler inherited not only land, but alignment. Mirror, jewel, sword, reflection, connection, power. Yet inheritance does not guarantee embodiment. Every generation must rediscover what the pattern means. The emperor stands within triad, heaven above, earth below, human agency between. If he leans too heavily toward heaven, he risks abstraction, ritual without practicality. If he leans too heavily toward earth, he risks fragmentation, local concerns overshadowing shared orientation. If he leans too heavily toward agency alone, he risks domination, sword without mirror. The role demands balance, but balance is not static. It shifts with circumstance. In times of stability, authority feels natural. Ritual flows easily, succession passes quietly, but in times of disruption, the pattern strains. Ambition rises, resources thin, voices compete. It is here that the emperor's true position appears, not as conqueror, not as deity, as mediator. There is something profoundly fragile about a system built on memory. It requires continuous recognition that power is borrowed. Borrowed from heaven's orientation. Borrowed from earth's grounding. Borrowed from people's consent. The myths never portrayed authority as permanent possession. Even Amaterasu withdrew. Even Okunanushi yielded. Even Susanoo was exiled. Divine figures themselves experienced correction. How much more, then, must mortal rulers remain aware of their limits? I find this aspect of the story striking. In many traditions, kings are depicted as invincible or absolute. Here, the emperor stands within pattern, not above it. His legitimacy depends not only on descent but on alignment. If alignment falters, ritual alone cannot repair it. Reflection must occur. This, to me, is one of the quiet strengths within the mythic structure. Authority is elevated, yet constrained, sacred, yet accountable. The three treasures symbolize this tension. The mirror does not flatter, it reveals. The jewel does not isolate, it binds. The sword does not celebrate violence, it reminds of responsibility. Generational renewal thus becomes critical. An aging ruler must prepare successor not only in governance but in orientation. Without orientation, inheritance becomes hollow. Mortality ensures that no emperor holds power indefinitely. Blossom chosen long ago guaranteed impermanence. This impermanence is not weakness. It is corrective. It prevents stagnation. It forces reflection. In my view, this is perhaps the most enduring lesson embedded in the myth. Stability is never final. It must be renewed, not through constant upheaval, but through conscious recalibration. Each new emperor must ask, am I aligned with heaven's clarity? Am I grounded in earth's reality? Am I exercising power with restraint? If the answer to any of these drifts, pattern begins to loosen. History would later demonstrate that even sacred lineage faces disruption. But the mythic architecture offers framework for recovery. Return to mirror, strengthen jewel, sheath sword when unnecessary. Renewal is not dramatic, it is attentive. The emperor within the pattern is not a fixed icon. He is participant in ongoing adjustment. And perhaps that is why the system endured in memory longer than many that relied solely on force, because it embedded self-correction within its origin story, heaven above, earth below, human between, and between those realms, responsibility. As generations passed, the three treasures remained. They were not displayed for spectacle. They were not wielded casually, and yet their meaning did not fade. If anything, it deepened. The mirror, the jewel, the sword. At first, in the early descent, they appeared almost practical. Objects carried from heaven to earth as signs of legitimacy. But over time, they became something else. They became questions. I often find myself thinking that the mirror may be the most difficult of the three. A sword can be admired. A jewel can be revered. But a mirror confronts. It demands stillness. It demands honesty. To rule under the symbol of a mirror is to accept that self-deception is the first fracture of authority. When Amaterasu was drawn from the cave, it was not force that restored her. It was reflection. Light returned when she saw herself. That detail lingers with me. It suggests that clarity is not imposed from outside. It is recognized from within. For a ruler, or for any person placed in responsibility, the mirror is uncomfortable. It exposes excess. It reveals imbalance. But without it, power drifts. The jewel, in contrast, feels gentle. It binds. It connects. It reminds the ruler that authority does not exist in isolation. Lineage matters. Community matters. Continuity matters. In modern terms, though the myth speaks in ancient symbols, I see the jewel as relationship. Without relationship, even sacred authority becomes hollow. Okunanushi's consent was not forced, it was negotiated. That negotiation is jewel-like. It binds through agreement. The sword, finally, is perhaps the most misunderstood. It emerged from chaos, hidden within the serpent's body. It was not born in heaven, it was discovered on earth. That detail matters. It tells us that power often comes from confronting disorder directly. But the sword was never celebrated as a first solution. It was last. Storm, once uncontrolled, learned discipline. Force became measured. In my view, the sword represents action. Necessary at times, dangerous when premature. When I consider the three together, I see not hierarchy but sequence. First, reflect. Second, connect. Third, act, reverse the order, and imbalance follows. Act before reflecting, and one risks violence. Reflect without connecting, and one risks detachment. Connect without capacity to act, and one risks stagnation. The elegance of this structure continues to impress me. It is simple, yet resilient. Even as history moves beyond myth, these symbols remain applicable, not as relics, as reminders. Generational renewal does not only mean new ruler, it means renewed understanding of these principles. Each era must reinterpret mirror, jewel, and sword within its own challenges. Famine may require decisive action. Conflict may require strength, but reflection and connection must precede them. The myth never claims that harmony is permanent. It suggests instead that harmony is maintained through attention. Attention to self, attention to relationship, attention to timing. I think this is why the imperial narrative leans so heavily on symbolism. Symbols endure when literal circumstances change. A mirror does not age. A jewel does not speak. A sword does not decide. Humans do. And that is the fragile center of the pattern. Heaven provides orientation. Earth provides grounding. Human choice determines outcome. When I step back and look at the long arc, from suspension before creation to Yamato's settlement, I see not a story of domination. I see a story of calibration, separation, loss, restoration, consent, mortality, inheritance, and now, interpretation. The three treasures are no longer merely objects, they are lenses. Through them, each generation must see itself anew. Stability is persuasive. When fields grow steadily, when rituals proceed without interruption, when succession passes without conflict, it is easy to believe that balance has become permanent. But if the myths have taught us anything, it is this. Nothing in this structure is permanent. Not heaven's clarity, not earth's grounding, not human restraint. The cave once held light. Storm once shook heaven. Sea once drew a prince into depth, though each moment of equilibrium emerged only after disruption. And I find myself returning to this idea often, that stability is not an achievement but a practice. Yamato's settlement felt decisive. The eastward journey concluded, the center established. Yet even that center required maintenance. Mortality guarantees fluctuation. A wise ruler may be followed by a weak one. A reflective generation may be followed by one less attentive. The pattern remains available, but availability does not ensure use. The fragility of stability lies not in external threat alone, but in internal drift. A mirror neglected grows symbolic only. A jewel unexamined becomes decorative. A sword, admired for its shine, tempts premature use. When reflection fades, connection loosens. When connection loosens, force rises to compensate. And force, without reflection, returns us to storm. This cyclical tension appears throughout the myth. Izanagi crossed a boundary out of love, but impatience fractured possibility. Susanoo's grief turned into destruction when not understood. Huri's curiosity broke trust. Each disruption carried lesson. But lessons must be remembered. Otherwise they repeat. I think this is where the myth feels most human. It does not present a flawless lineage. It presents recurring correction. The imperial structure, if it endured in memory, did so not because it avoided fragility, but because it acknowledged it. Ritual is not superstition in this context. It is rehearsal, a reminder that imbalance can return. Season follows season, but winter always arrives. Stability, therefore, requires anticipation. To assume permanence is to invite fracture. And yet, fragility is not weakness. Blossoms fall. Stone erodes slowly. Storm disperses. Sea recedes. But each returns in pattern. Fragility creates renewal. If rulers were stone alone, unchanging and eternal, stagnation might follow. If rulers were storm alone, chaos would dominate. Blossom, chosen long ago, ensured that no authority would last beyond its season. I see in that choice a subtle wisdom. Impermanence forces adaptation. Adaptation sustains continuity. Even in modern reflection, far removed from ancient Yamato, the structure still resonates. Institutions today, whatever their form, face the same tension. How to remain stable without becoming rigid. How to adapt without dissolving identity. The triad still applies. Reflection, connection, action. Remove anyone, and stability weakens. The fragility of stability is not a flaw in the system. It is its defining feature. A system that cannot be disturbed cannot evolve. But a system that ignores disturbance cannot survive. The myths do not promise eternal harmony. They promise recurring opportunity to restore balance. This, perhaps, is the quiet reassurance within the narrative. Heaven does not withdraw forever. Storm does not rage endlessly. Sea does not hold what is meant to return. Correction is possible, but it requires awareness. Stability must be renewed not once, but continually. And so, as the generations continue, as rulers rise and fall, as ritual persists and reforms, the question remains the same. Will reflection precede action? Will connection temper ambition? Will power remain disciplined? The fragility of stability rests not in the stars, nor in the soil, nor in the ocean's depth. It rests in choice, and choice, as always, is human. If we step back from the long arc of the story, from the separation of heaven and earth to the settlement of Yamato, what becomes visible is not a straight line. It is a cycle, suspension, separation, creation, loss, descent, restoration, consent, mortality, renewal, and then repetition in quieter form. The myths never truly end. They soften, they settle into pattern. Heaven separated from earth, yet continued to influence it. Storm disrupted order, yet later protected it. Sea concealed what was lost, yet returned it when memory awakened. Each disruption eventually became instruction. Each instruction required remembrance. I often think that what makes this mythology enduring is not its scale, but its rhythm. Nothing remains untouched. Nothing remains unchallenged. Yet nothing remains irreparable. Even the descent into Yomi did not destroy the world. It restructured it. Even the cave's darkness did not extinguish light. It clarified its value. Even exile did not erase Susanoo. It redirected him. Cycle is not circular in the sense of stagnation. It is spiraled, returning, but not identical. Each generation inherits pattern, but under different conditions. Different pressures, different uncertainties, and yet the underlying architecture remains: heaven above, earth below, human between. This triad does not demand perfection. It demands participation. Mortality ensures that no one generation controls the cycle fully. Blossoms fall, new blossoms open, stone endures. Storm reshapes, sea withdraws, sea advances. The emperor, standing within this pattern, is less a ruler of destiny and more a caretaker of rhythm. And I find that idea unexpectedly calming. The burden of controlling everything is impossible, but the responsibility of maintaining balance, however briefly, is attainable. The cycle reminds us that endings are not annihilations, they are transitions. Yomi was not destruction of life, it was boundary. The cave was not defeat of light, it was pause. The sea was not oblivion, it was depth. When I reflect on the full arc, I see less a myth of conquest and more a myth of recalibration. Recalibration after loss, recalibration after excess, recalibration after ambition. This is not dramatic heroism, it is sustained awareness. Cycles also humble authority. No ruler, no institution, no generation stands outside them. To believe oneself exempt is to invite correction. History beyond myth would prove this repeatedly. Yet the mythic framework quietly anticipates it. Fragility is assumed. Correction is expected. The story began in suspension, undifferentiated potential. It moved through shaping and separation. Now, in its final movement, it rests in repetition. Cycles do not eliminate responsibility, they intensify it. Because if correction is possible, neglect becomes choice. I sometimes imagine the early kami watching this long unfolding, not intervening constantly, but observing whether balance is remembered. Heaven does not micromanage earth, it offers orientation. Earth does not reject heaven, it grounds it. Human action bridges. Cycle continues only when the bridge remains intact, but with widened perspective. The dramatic episodes are behind us, the architecture stands. Now, what remains is quiet return to reflection, return to connection, return to disciplined action, return not as repetition of mythic spectacle but as renewal of awareness. The world continues, sun rises, fields grow, generations turn, cycle endures. If cycles describe movement, breath describes presence. Heaven above, earth below, human between. The space between them is not empty, it is lived. From the first separation of light and dense matter, distance made relationship possible. Without distance, there is no tension. Without tension, no awareness. Breath occupies that distance. Inhale, heaven descending into awareness. Exhale, earth grounding in tension. The myths speak in grand images, serpents, storms, caves, sea palaces. But beneath these images lies something quieter, a rhythm. When Amaterasu withdrew, light paused. When she returned, breath resumed. When Izanagi descended into Yomi, he crossed threshold without preparation. When he purified himself in water, he restored inner rhythm. The movement between realms is not only geographic, it is internal. I think this is why the mythology feels less like distant legend and more like reflection of human experience. We each move between light and shadow, between clarity and confusion, between connection and isolation. Breath marks that passage. When overwhelmed, we withdraw. When ready, we return. Storm arises within us. It disrupts, it unsettles. Yet, when recognized, it can be redirected. The myth never denies turbulence. It incorporates it. Heaven does not eliminate storm. It integrates it. Sea does not drown lineage. It deepens it. Earth does not resist heaven entirely. It negotiates. The emperor within the pattern is symbolic of this breathing space. He stands not as fixed point, but as mediator of flow. Authority inhaling tradition. Exhaling adaptation. When breath shortens, balance falters. When breath steadies, clarity returns. I find something deeply human here. The myths do not demand constant heroism. They suggest steadiness, reflection before action, connection before decision, discipline before force. These are not dramatic virtues, they are sustained ones. Breath between heaven and earth also implies humility. Human position is central, but not dominant. Heaven provides orientation. Earth provides grounding. Human choice moves between them. Too much assent and abstraction removes compassion. Too much grounding and aspiration diminishes. Breath keeps both in motion. In this way, the entire arc of the story can be seen as inhalation and exhalation. Separation, inhale, creation, exhale, loss, inhale, restoration, exhale, descent, inhale, settlement, exhale, reflection, inhale, renewal, exhale. Nothing remains held forever. Even stability must breathe. Perhaps that is why fragility is not tragic here, it is natural. Holding breath too long causes strain. Releasing too quickly causes imbalance. Measured rhythm sustains life. When I consider the long passage from cosmic suspension to imperial institution, what lingers is not spectacle. It is continuity of breath. The world did not freeze after Yamato. It did not dissolve after storm. It continued, breathing through generations. Heaven and earth remain distinct, yet they are never fully separate. Human awareness bridges them moment by moment, and perhaps this is the quiet invitation embedded in the myth, to notice the breath, to sense when alignment drifts, to return gently, not through force, through awareness. Breath does not announce itself loudly, it sustains silently, and so does balance. In the beginning there was suspension, no horizon, no division, no name. From that suspension came separation, from separation came structure, from structure came creation, from creation came loss, and from loss came understanding. Now, at the quiet end of this long unfolding, nothing new needs to happen. The architecture stands. Heaven remains above, earth remains below. Sea rests between depth and shore. Storm has learned discipline. Light has known withdrawal. Mortality has shaped lineage. The emperor stands within pattern, not beyond it, and the pattern continues. If there is a final descent here, it is not into darkness, it is into stillness, the kind of stillness that follows long awareness. The myths began with vast movement, cosmic refinement, divine births, serpents, caves, flames, sea palaces. But as the story matured, the drama softened. It did not disappear, it integrated. I find that deeply meaningful. The earliest chapters shook heaven and earth. The final chapters ask only for reflection. Perhaps this mirrors life itself. Youth seeks event. Maturity seeks balance. In the myth, the greatest shifts occurred when someone paused, when Izanagi purified, when Amaterasu looked into the mirror, when Okuninushi chose consent over war, when Jimmu adjusted direction with the sun. Correction followed awareness. Stillness preceded alignment. The final descent, then, is not into Yomi. It is into acceptance. Acceptance that cycles will continue. Acceptance that fragility is inherent. Acceptance that balance must be renewed again and again. Heaven will not collapse. Earth will not dissolve. But human awareness must remain attentive. The world no longer trembles with mythic intensity. It breathes. That breathing is enough. The mirror still exists. Whether literal or symbolic, it waits. The jewel still binds. Whether seen or unseen, connection persists. The sword still rests. Whether drawn or sheathed, power remains potential. But the greatest force now is neither storm nor flame. It is consciousness, the quiet recognition that alignment is possible, and that misalignment is correctable. The story does not end because pattern does not end. It softens into continuity. Heaven above, earth below, human between. Breath moving gently. stillness holding all three. Epilogue. When stability is temporary. If this long arc teaches anything, it may be this. Stability is always temporary, not fragile in the sense of weakness, but fragile in the sense of living. Living systems shift, they adjust, they falter, they recover. The mythology never promised permanence, it promised pattern. It promised that imbalance would arise. It promised that correction was possible. That is a different kind of reassurance. The first separation of heaven and earth did not freeze the cosmos into perfection, and it created orientation. The sealing of Yomi did not end death, it gave death rhythm. The cave did not eliminate darkness. It made light conscious of itself. The descent of heaven did not impose eternal rule. It introduced responsibility, and responsibility must be renewed. I often return to the image of the mirror, not as sacred artifact locked in shrine, but as metaphor. Every generation holds it differently. Some look clearly, some avoid looking, some glance only briefly. But the mirror remains. The question is always the same. Will reflection precede action? Will connection temper ambition? Will power remain disciplined? These questions do not belong only to emperors. They belong to anyone standing between larger forces. Heaven and earth may be mythic language. But orientation and grounding are timeless realities. To stand between them is to choose balance consciously. What strikes me most is how the mythology accepts impermanence. Blossom was chosen over stone. That choice ensured beauty and ensured decline. Yet decline was never treated as final. It was part of renewal. If Rome teaches us anything, it may be that stability is always temporary. And perhaps Japanese myth suggests something quieter, that temporary stability is enough. Enough if renewed, enough if reflected upon, enough if connected to something larger than individual ambition. The world began in suspension. It moved through turbulence. It settled into structure, and now it continues, not perfectly, but rhythmically. Heaven above, earth below, human between. And in that space, choice. The story ends where it began. Not in chaos, not in spectacle, in stillness.